Chapter 12. Starting to Create a Buzz. Even though the public access TV Whitney Houston's manager performance turned out to be a disaster, Playground still had their very first live gig to get ready for, and we couldn't have been more psyched. The weekend after the talent competition, the whole band went to Billy O's to meet the owner and discuss more details. Steve, DeVito, and I piled into Tommy's car and headed to Staten Island. Of course, we had a few drinks along the way to loosen up. For some crazy reason, drinking and driving wasn't as much of an offense back in the 80s and early 90s. Crazy. By the time we got to Billy O's, we were all feeling pretty good. Remember, I'm still only 16 years old at this point, while Tommy, Steve, and DeVito were all about 20 or 21. Because of how I looked, no one ever questioned it, not even the club owner who graciously greeted us at the door. I'm not sure if I ever actually heard his name, but I just assumed his name was Billy. Billy began showing us around the club, pointing out places like where we'd load in our equipment and where the dressing room was. Since this was all brand new to us, it was very overwhelming and exciting. We were going to have our own dressing room. Holy crap, I shouted. Again, young and innocent makes for a priceless, unforgettable time. Billy asked us if we secured the opening band for the night we were playing. We said that we were working on it, but not to worry. In actuality, we had no idea who we were going to get to open for us. Billy then asked if we brought any passes to leave with him so he could put them around the club. We had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. We said in almost unison, "Passes? What kind of passes?" Knowing this was our first gig, Billy was pretty patient with us. He went on to explain that we needed to print passes so that we could give them out to advertise our show. Again, because this was all so new to us, we asked Billy, where would we get passes like that made? Remember, this was before everyone had a computer or even a home printer. I had never printed anything in my life up to this point. Billy told us, go to a local printing shop and have them printed. Put the name of the club, name of the band, the date, and the time. After a few more minutes and a quick drink for the road, we were headed back to Brooklyn. On the way, Steve said that he knew a printing place near the bank where he worked on Avenue U and 16th Street called Pip Printing. Now, the only other problem we had was finding a band to open for us. I remember hearing from Brian Hanna, the old singer for my band Creation, who told me that our former bass player, Kevin Murray, had a new band called Naked Gypsy, and that they'd played a few gigs. Steve was in charge of getting the passes printed, and I was in charge of getting the opening band. I called Murr the next day to ask him if his new band were interested in playing with us. Much like Playground, Naked Gypsy was just starting out, and they jumped at the chance for a gig at a new club. A few days later, Steve and I were very excited to pick up our new passes at Pip Printing. We didn't know it at the time, but the passes looked terrible. They were all white with plain black lettering. All they said was, Billy O's presents Playground, Saturday, August 4th. Doors open at 9, show at 11. The passes didn't even have the address of Billy O's, the phone number, or even how much it was to get in. It didn't matter though. We weren't giving them to strangers. We were going to give them to every single person we knew, friends, family, neighbors, the mailman, everybody. Everyone that we handed a pass to said they were coming. My old grammar school friends were very excited to finally see me play live. Not only that, but they were excited that they were going to be able to hang out in a bar and drink. After all, like me, we were only 16 years old, and some were only 15. Something terrible happened the day right before the show. I went grocery shopping with my mom and my cousin Rosemary, who was driving. My mom was in the passenger seat, and I was in the back. After we parked, we all exited the car about the same time, with my mom slightly ahead of me. While my mom's front door was still open, I reached up and grabbed the bar in between the doors to lift myself. While holding the bar, my mom slammed her car door shut, immediately crushing and trapping my fingers in the door. I was in shock and didn't even scream. I calmly said, "Ma," and pointed at the car door with the other hand while my fingers were trapped inside. My leg began to shake, and my mom started to scream as she feverishly tried to open the car door. Unfortunately, the car door was now locked, and she couldn't open it. She started to scream to my cousin, Joey's fingers are caught in the door! My cousin began to fumble for her keys to open her side and then reach over to unlock the passenger door. What was probably only a few seconds felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened and my fingers were free. That's when the pain hit me. My ring and index fingers were completely crushed. We got right back in the car and rushed straight to the emergency room. Sure enough, my 2 fingers were broken. As the doctor was putting my fingers in a metal splint, I told him that I had my first gig with my new band and that I couldn't play the drums with these big metal splints on. Canceling the show was never even an option in my mind. He advised me to keep the splint on or try taping my fingers together like athletes do when they need to play with broken fingers. I didn't even tell the guys in the band until I saw them the next day when we were loading up for the show. I figured they would be nervous enough without this bit of good news. Besides my broken fingers, the other big problem we still faced was how to get people to the show in Staten Island. Obviously, my 15 and 16-year-old friends didn't drive, and most of our other friends didn't have cars either. There's something about being young that somehow motivates you to just figure out a way to get things done. You don't overthink things, always believing that there was a simple solution to everything. For this particular problem, we would just pack anyone who didn't have a ride into the back of the U-Haul that we were renting to bring all of our equipment to the gig. The back compartments in a typical U-Haul are definitely not made to carry passengers for many reasons. First, we would have to roll down the large sliding back door and lock it from the outside. This was extremely dangerous. It meant that all the people in the back would be locked in and only be able to get out if someone from the outside unlocked and opened the door. Second, there was no light in the back while the truck was in motion. This was crazy, mainly because the passengers would also be back there with all the band's equipment. This was the first time any of us had rented a U-Haul, and we didn't realize that it might be a good idea to strap everything down so nothing slid around. With all of the people sitting on the floor, all of the heavy equipment sliding around, and it being pitch black, it all added up to be a potential disaster. On top of all of that, we had our singer Tommy driving the truck, and he thought it would be funny to take turns and bumps at a fast speed to make everything and everyone in the back go flying. As crazy as all of this was, everyone actually wanted to be in the back of the U-Haul. It sounded like fun to us. So, on the night of August 4th, 1990, me and about 15 other guys, along with 4 or 5 cases of beer, piled into the back of a moving truck with all of our equipment. The U-Haul was followed by a procession of cars headed to Staten Island to Playground's very first show. We had our army to support us, and we planned on delivering for them. If every show from here on out was like this, sign me up for the rest of my life. This was going to be great. My plan was to have a lot of my friends help me load my drums in and then stay in the club until the show started. That way, they didn't have to pass the doorman who was bound to be checking IDs later in the night. Once we loaded in, it was time for my very first sound check. Even though I had already played a gig at the Battle of the Bands 2 years before, I definitely did not get a sound check for that show. To tell you the truth, I wasn't exactly sure what a sound check even was. The sound man told me to hit the bass drum, so I did. Once. He said, as politely as he could, "Please keep hitting it until I say stop." Well, how was I supposed to know that's what he meant? He went one by one to get sounds from my massive 10-piece drum kit plus my 3 rototoms. So, with the rototoms, I had a total of 8 rack toms from 6-inch all the way to 15-inch. It looked massive sitting on the drum riser, just like Eric Carr's. After testing each drum one by one, the sound man told me to play the whole kit to see what it sounded like. I began doing all sorts of triplet double bass fills and big rolls descending on my toms. Just then, the opening band, Naked Gypsy, walked in. Their mouths were hanging open. It turned out that not only had my old bassist Murr been in the band, but the singer and the guitar player were the band that I auditioned for about a year prior. You remember, the group that looked a little too dirty for me. We recognized each other immediately while I was sound checking. When I got off stage, I greeted them very friendly, even though they had been pretty upset that I didn't want to join their band. I was actually expecting a little hostility, but instead I got praises. They couldn't believe how good I had sounded during the sound check. After sound check, I had to explain to the drummer for Naked Gypsy that he would be setting up in front of the drum riser. This to me was always the number one benefit of being the headlining band. You could set up your gear and just leave it on stage instead of having to rush to set it up in between bands. I just always felt that coming out in front of the audience to set up my drums caused the show to lose a sense of mystique. The people in the audience don't want to see that. They want the show and the people on stage to be larger than life. Later that night, after Naked Gypsy finished their set to a dull applause, I looked out from the dressing room and the club was packed. I had all of my good friends, plus my brother, and even my mom came. Once Naked Gypsy cleared the stage, the audience began to shout, "We want playground! We want playground!" Tommy, Steve, DeVito, and I huddled together in the back and told each other to kick ass and have fun. As soon as we walked onto the stage, the place went wild. It's a feeling I could never describe to someone who has never been on stage. It's not just about being on stage and getting cheered and feeling the audience energy. It's about knowing how hard you worked every day to get to this point. All the hours practicing, the late nights, the long train rides to rehearsal, the hundreds of hours rehearsing in your room to get better. It was all for something, and this moment was it. Before we hit the very first note, I felt a very easy calm come over me. It was a feeling that I immediately recognized. The cheering crowd began to slow. Their sounds began to grow quiet. I could feel the hair on my arms begin to raise. My heart was pounding strong, but slow and controlled. Then the moment froze. I took a deep breath and felt joy overwhelm me. I knew everything in my life had led me right to where I was supposed to be, on this stage, right now. I saw all my friends, my mom, my brother, with the biggest smiles on their faces. I knew this was just the beginning, but I was going to enjoy every second of it. Just like that, everything unfroze and we began playing our opening song, Could Have Been You. Playground was firing on all cylinders. No one seemed nervous and no one seemed overwhelmed. At one point, Steve broke a guitar string and needed our friend Dave, who was Steve's guitar tech for the night, to change the string and hand him his backup guitar. Of course, Dave was nowhere to be found. It turned out that he was in the audience partying with all of the other crazy maniacs that night. Before the show, I was so excited to get on stage that I forgot to get myself water to drink during the performance. I quickly gestured to my friend Jimmy Gaffey, who was my roadie that night, that I needed 2 iced teas from the bar. This was before bottled water was a very common thing. Jimmy came back a few moments later and handed me 2 tall glasses of iced tea. I quickly chugged the first one down. Because I drank it so fast, I didn't realize until I was done that it tasted a little weird. My moron friend / roadie got me 2 Long Island iced teas, which were made with 4 different kinds of alcohol. Guzzling one of those went straight to my head. Luckily, I was okay and got through the rest of the performance. Over the course of my career, I was never someone who could drink before a performance. Being a drummer, I always felt it would throw off my equilibrium and cause me to play badly. When it was time for our final song, Tommy thanked everyone for coming, and we busted into Fats Domino's Ain't That a Shame. The crowd erupted, probably not so much for the song choice, but because they knew it was their last opportunity to go crazy. By the time the song was over, the entire stage was filled with our friends going completely berserk. Everyone refused to leave. They began chanting, "One more song! One more song!" As incredible as this was, it was a disaster because we didn't have any more songs. We'd played every song we knew together as a band. Luckily, Tommy started to sing the Van Halen version of Happy Trails, which was completely a cappella. No instruments, just vocals. It worked, and the whole crowd began to sing along. This was an absolute perfect show from top to bottom. After we finished, Billy told us that we did a great job and handed us $52. Even though he was obviously robbing us, the place was jam-packed. We had brought over 250 people. It didn't matter. We were so thrilled with what we just accomplished that we gladly took the $52, split it 4 ways, and were the happiest band on the face of the earth. It worked out to be $13 per band member. We decided to just put the money on the bar for celebratory drinks. But before I did, I took $1 out to keep as a memento to commemorate the first dollar I'd ever made as a musician. We were on such a high after playing our first show at Billy O's that we didn't want the party to end. By the time we got back to our old neighborhood in Brooklyn at around 4 a.m., mostly everyone was either passed out or headed home. Tommy, myself, Playground's #1 fan Ernie Lamont, and my 2 great friends Rob Scally and Bobby Howell all went to Marine Park with a few cases of beer and stayed up all night drinking and talking about the show. We watched the sun come up while we were floating on Cloud 9. We even began to see people from the neighborhood walking to church. We waved hello while holding up our beer. Experiences like this really made me love what I was doing more than ever. Of course, I love my drums and playing them was all I ever wanted to do, but bonding with people over what you loved was priceless. After a few days of still flying high, it was time to start thinking about our next show. Now that we had a little clout by filling up Billy O's with such a big crowd, we could go to other clubs and use that as a selling point for our band. It worked like a charm. I'm not sure if the clubs ever really checked to see if we drew that many people, or if it was just simply that now we had confidence when we made the calls to the clubs. Either way, we booked 2 more gigs right away. For our second show, we would play in our hometown of Brooklyn at the Crazy Country Club, located on 64th Street in 7th Avenue. The date was set for August 31st, 1990. The Crazy Country Club was a semi-famous local spot. Once we booked the show, we knew it was going to be huge. And huge would prove to be a mild understatement. Because this was a local show, every person we knew could get themselves there. I think I invited everyone I'd ever met in my whole life. We had everyone coming. Friends, family, friends of friends, neighbors, and just about anyone from the neighborhood that heard what a great time our show at Billy O's had been. They all flocked to the Crazy Country Club that night to not only see a great show, but to be at a great party. That's really the best way to describe the early Playground shows. They were the biggest and best parties I've ever been to. And we were the hosts and guests of honor. Ernie said it best. It was such a joy when Playground played. I didn't feel like I was watching a band. I felt like I was in the band. You know what? Wait a second. Let me say that like Ernie would say it. It was such a joy when Playground played. I didn't feel like I was watching the band. I feel like I was in the band. Ernie's going to kill me for that one. Ever since joining Playground, Tommy would always talk about his old girlfriend, Erin, whom with he was still in love with. I think every Playground song was about her in some way. Up until the night of the Crazy Country Club, I'd never even met her. She showed up to the show with her new boyfriend, and Tommy was a wreck because of it. He performed well, but you could see him the whole night slowly spiraling down. After we finished our amazing set, I saw all of Tommy's friends starting to line up. I had no idea what was going on until his friend Sean came over to me and said, "Hey Joey, come with me. There's something I want to show you." Still not knowing what was happening, I went along with it out of curiosity. At the end of the line, I saw a guy sitting in a chair while one by one, each person in the line walked past him and spit on him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The guy didn't even get up to try to leave. He knew if he did, he would probably get beaten to a pulp. After about 40 people spit on this poor bastard, I finally asked Sean, "Who is that guy?" He chuckled and said, "That's Erin's new boyfriend." Even though this was a sick thing to do, I respected it. They loved their friend Tommy so much that they weren't going to let this girl parade her new boyfriend in his face at his own concert. My friends were the same way. We had a bond that meant we would do anything for each other. And obviously, so did Tommy and his friends. Because Tommy and I had the same kind of friends, I think that made us grow even closer. The show was a major success. The place was sold out and then some. The headlining band didn't bring anyone. Playground had sold the place out, and the owner knew it. In fact, he wouldn't let us leave without booking us for another night. He offered us the headlining slot on September 26, 1990, and we gladly accepted. We were now rehearsing in Rockaway Studios, which was where all of the local bands began to rehearse. We had been there for about a month, and the owner, Mitch Glider, had never really given us the time of day. He was kind of a cocky, nerdy guy who thought he had more power than he really did. The entertainment business is funny. Nobody gives you the time of day until they think they can make money off of you. Our next session at Rockaway, following the big success of the Crazy Country Club gig, Mitch was a completely different person to us. He greeted us with open arms and told us that he wanted to talk to us after rehearsal. He told us that he'd heard through the grapevine that we had an amazing show at the Crazy Country Club, and he would love to work with us to help promote the next show. We didn't know exactly what that meant, and we told Mitch that we had already booked another show for September 26th. Mitch said, "Great, let me promote it for you. It'll be great." Once again, being the young, naive morons that we were, we didn't realize that we absolutely didn't need Mitch at all. We didn't understand that he just wanted a piece of the action by calling himself the promoter. We were going to pack the Crazy Country Club without any help from Mitch. Another lesson learned to be put in my pocket for a later date. Even though I was only 16, I was absorbing everything about the music business that I could. All of these lessons would come in very handy down the road. The Crazy Country Club show would now be billed as Rockaway Studios Presents Playground. Ridiculous. The date was September 26, 1990. The show was our biggest and best yet. We were headlining in our hometown, and the word was officially out that a playground show was the place to be. The Crazy Country Club was completely sold out. We even had to sneak a few dozen of our friends in the back door because they weren't letting anyone else in. The band we opened for a month prior was now opening for us. I always remember reading stories about when Kiss first started. They were opening for Blue Oyster Cult, and then a few months later, Blue Oyster was opening for them. Now the same thing was happening to Playground. I don't know why, but I always associated everything with Kiss. Mitch, the so-called promoter, jumped on stage to get the crowd ready and to announce us. He started by saying, "Hi everyone, my name is Mitch and I own Rockaway Studios." Before he could even finish his opening line, the crowd began to chant, "Fuck Mitch, fuck Mitch, fuck Mitch."
My name is Mitch and I'm the owner of Rockaway Studios. All I did behind these shows is to pick out the bands that are working the hardest. Those are the guys that love me.
Those were our friends, all right. They could spot a phony a mile away, and that's exactly what Mitch was. He saw dollar signs in us, and he took advantage of a young band. That chant was classic and exactly what Mitch deserved. From the moment we hit our first note, the crowd went absolutely insane. Then, toward the end of our set, another classic chant broke out. The United States had just recently entered into the Gulf War with Iraq, and Tommy decided that night, before our last song, he would make a political statement. He began preaching from the stage about America and how great the USA was. He then started the now infamous chant that was luckily captured on video. Tommy shouted, "Fuck Iran! Fuck Iran!" Then the whole crowd joined in with the same. The only problem was, we were at war with Iraq, not Iran. The crowd was filled with predominantly underage kids who were very drunk at this point and would have followed any chant that we started. Tommy's sister Liz was videoing us that night, and her screaming at Tommy, "It's Iraq, you idiot, not Iran," is quite audible on the video.
But as an American, I say, fuck Iran!
After our set was finished, one of the audience members cornered Steve in the bathroom. It was none other than our former playground guitar player, Brendan Murphy. Brendan had left the band a few months prior after having an argument with Steve and Tommy because he didn't think the band was serious enough. He thought we should be gigging and doing more. Now, just a few months later, Brendan saw what an overnight success we had become and essentially begged Steve to rejoin the band. Steve was more than happy to have Brendan back and immediately said yes. Tommy DeVito and I didn't have any strong opinions on it either way. We felt that Steve was the guitar player. If he wanted Brendan back in, it was okay with us. I actually didn't think we needed Brendan back in the band. I thought we sounded great with one guitar player. When Brendan originally left, Steve really stepped up and took control, even with his very quiet and laid-back personality. Unfortunately, when Brendan rejoined, Steve once again became quiet and a little bit withdrawn. I'm not sure if it was because he never was that confident in his playing, or if it was just an easier role for him to play inside the structure of the band. I personally always enjoyed Steve's playing more than Brendan's. After rehearsing a few times with Brendan and welcoming him back, he came up with an idea of having a playground newsletter. Remember, this is still way before email and the internet. So, once a month, we sent a newsletter to all of our fans to let them know what was happening in the world of Playground. We named it Letters from the Sandbox. Brendan would type it, filled with all the pertinent information that we needed to promote. We would also all personally sign each one and handwrite a special message to all of the people we personally knew. Because we still had no money, we saved on postage by hand-delivering every single letter. As crazy as this sounds, these were the wild things that I absolutely loved and have the best memories of to this day. Each band member was essentially in charge of delivering the letters to the people they knew. Because I didn't drive, our friend Ernie, who had now become a cross between band manager and band mascot, would drive me from house to house to hand-deliver the Letters from the Sandbox. I know it sounds like a miserable and tedious task, but Ernie and I had a great time. Ernie always prided himself on his musical knowledge and loved more than anything to introduce new music to people. We spent 3 straight nights together at about 4 or 5 hours per night and became really close friends in the process. Again, being young and innocent was such a positive. This is something I would never even dream of doing in my later years. I would think it was such a waste of time and energy. But because everything was so new and exciting, I was willing to do anything. Besides, what could be better at that time than hand-delivering a newsletter from my new super popular band to all my good friends and family? On top of that, I became close with one of my best friends for years to come. Ernie would actually play a very significant role in my life years later. At this time, I was still so obsessed with Kiss that I didn't really give older music a chance. Of course, I knew Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, and the Beatles. But it wasn't until Ernie really showed me the obscure stuff from those bands that I really became a fan. Ernie never liked to show people the hit songs from bands. He always wanted to introduce people to songs that nobody had ever heard of. I totally understood that mentality because when I would introduce someone to Kiss, I never liked playing them Rock and Roll All Night or Detroit Rock City. Instead, I would play 100,000 Years from Alive or Saint and Sinner from Creatures of the Night. Ernie loved delivering these newsletters too, but for different reasons than I did. He now had a captive audience who would spend hours upon hours listening to his musical suggestions. I hate to admit it, and I'm sure he will love to hear this and never let me live it down, but I definitely credit Ernie for broadening and expanding my musical taste and knowledge. Once all of the letters from the sandbox were delivered, we concentrated on rehearsing for the show and catching Brendan up to speed. After playing those few amazing gigs, we were starting to get very confident with not only our playing, but our whole show and performance. Dare I say, we were even getting a little cocky. We hoped Brendan, who had never played a live show before, would be able to perform well. A few nights before Brendan's debut at our big Halloween show at the Crazy Country Club, Steve came down with a severe case of the chickenpox. We couldn't believe it. What were we going to do? We put so much time and planning into this show and into all of those newsletters we sent out. How would we even let everyone know if we had to cancel the show? We decided we wouldn't cancel. We had played up to this point with only one guitar player. Now Brendan would just have to cover all the parts like Steve did. Steve actually made the transition much easier than Brendan did. This just further confirmed my belief that Steve was the better player. My brother was picking up a few of my friends from the old neighborhood in his vintage white Camaro. Then we would all drive over to the show together. The plan was simple enough, but after almost an hour, they still hadn't arrived. We got a call that my brother was in an accident and that we needed to get to Avenue L and 57th Street immediately. Our hearts sank. Once arrived, we saw a massive crowd of people, but I didn't see my brother Danny's car anywhere. I thought to myself, oh, he probably just had a little fender bender or something and he left. That was until the crowd shifted and I could see through. My brother's car was essentially inside of a house. Yes, you heard it right. The car looked as if it hit a ramp like in Smokey and the Bandit, went airborne, flew 20 feet in the air, and landed in someone's living room. Thank God everyone was fine, but it was a scene right out of a movie. The night of Halloween 1990 was another huge success for Playground. The show was completely sold out and there was a line of people down around the block trying to get in. I didn't think we sounded as good or as tight as we did with Steve, but we made it work. Our crowd was so fanatical about the band and the shows that it didn't really matter if we sounded good or not. It was more about the energy and the party. Shortly after the Halloween show that Steve missed due to the chickenpox, I came down with them. This gave us another little setback, but we were back in the studio by mid-November. We could begin gigging again right after the holidays. There was a great buzz and electricity surrounding everything that Playground was doing, and we wanted to keep the momentum going. The phrase creating a buzz is constantly thrown around in the music industry. I have personally been in dozens of bands that have tried to create the proverbial buzz, and it's almost impossible. It's like capturing lightning in a bottle. Playground had definitely trapped themselves a nice-sized bolt.